Hello everyone, welcome to LSE for this evening's hybrid event on Beyond the Limits of Our Intelligence. My name is Martin Anthony, I'm the director of the LSE Data Science Institute and a professor of mathematics here. And I'm very pleased indeed to welcome our speaker, Nello Cristianini. It's great to have Nello here. I've known him for a long time. Just reminded me that I was his PhD examiner many years ago, his brilliant PhD thesis. He's a leading researcher in machine learning and artificial intelligence, currently a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Bath, and before that he held a variety of positions, including at the University of Bristol and University of California, Davis. And I'm delighted to say he's a visiting professor at LSE's Data Science Institute. Nello's early work on the mathematical underpinnings of support vector machines and kernel methods was highly influential. And he's since then carried out impactful work in a number of fairly diverse areas, including bioinformatics and the analysis of text and media. More recently, he's turned his attention and his writings to the social, philosophical, and ethical aspects of artificial intelligence. He's recently published Machina Sapiens, How Intelligent Machines Pass the Turing Test, which was a sequel in turn to The Shortcut, Why Intelligent Machines Do Not Think Like Us. The first book addressed the sort of shift from symbolic to statistical machine learning and some of the implications of that. This new book addresses large language models and some of the possible pathways towards artificial general intelligence, AGI, and the many deep questions associated with that. The final part of the trilogy, Superhuman, is already published in Italian and will be coming out fairly soon in English. So what if machines could match human cognitive abilities, not just in narrow tasks, but across the full spectrum of intelligence? That's the promise of artificial general intelligence. Many exciting possibilities arise, as well as, lots of difficult, challenging questions about what that would mean for us. And I'm sure that Nello is going to address some of these this evening. After he's spoken, which will be for about 50 minutes or so, there'll be ample time for questions. The online audience can use the Q&A facility. And if you're in the room, there'll be a microphone coming around for the questions. And it's important to wait until the microphone gets to you for recording purposes. Everything going to plan, the session will be recorded and published. And bit of housekeeping, please put your phones on silent so as not to disrupt proceedings. No fire alarm is scheduled, so if we do get one, it's for real, and we need to leave in an orderly fashion. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Nello.
Thank you. Good evening. I will speak maybe 40 minutes. Who knows? There is more time for questions. We'll see how long I can do. I think I would like to speak the entire evening on this one single question, which is, can a machine be more intelligent than a human being? Can a machine surpass humans in intelligence? So this is the question. Of course, it needs to be unpacked. What is intelligence? How do you know if succeeded? How do you measure progress? How do you build it? What happens after? So let's start from the beginning. There are many sub-questions, but the topic all the time will be, can a machine, and if not, why not? How do you know? How do we know? The entire thing. And the first thing is what we mean by intelligence, because this can become an emotional question as soon as we start thinking about human minds. So I will clarify. By intelligence, I just mean the ability to solve problems that we have not encountered before. So if you face a problem for the first time and you can solve it, that's an example of intelligence. It doesn't mean sentience, consciousness, awareness, sentiment, emotion. All that may be part of human mind. I'm focusing on intelligence, the ability to solve new problems. Just as an example, if you have memorized the solution to a problem, that doesn't count as intelligence. That's why I ask a new problem. translation of a document you've seen before and you know the translation of doesn't count. Making a chess move in a configuration where you already know the right move is memorization. Facing for the first time a new configuration nobody's seen before and making a sensible move requires intelligence. So that is my definition. And it is not by any means exclusive of humans. Animals have this kind of intelligence. Actually, most animals have intelligence, and it might not even need a brain. We don't know, but brains, of course, help a lot. So imagine intelligence as disability, and it's not human, and it existed on this planet before we came. We know this for sure. Animals before the first human, which means language is not involved. Animals were intelligent in that sense before language existed, because we didn't exist, right? So that's a very pervasive part of animal, or nature. So now, having said what we mean by intelligence, nobody will feel offended and come up with spiritual questions about emotion and sentiment and so on. We all agree that humans have something extra that perhaps a lizard will not have. It's fine. It's a matter of degree. There are types. To be honest, there isn't only one type. There's not only one dimension, and we are not the pinnacle of it. So this is just to clarify, right? We are not the paradigm of it. So how do we even know if a machine has overtaken us in intelligence? What would it mean? If we don't know how to tell, the question is empty. I mean, maybe it happened. Maybe it will happen. Maybe we're never going to know. How do you know? So, in a way, if we want to build a machine like this, how do you measure progress? How do you know which way to evolve the technology? So the other question I want to say is, it's pretty clear that we don't have one such machine. We don't have a machine that is more intelligent than humans. So I'm not here to tell you that AI has overtaken humans. I'm asking, is it possible? How do we know? How do we build it? What happens after? So next important point. I will put slides soon, but this is important to clarify before the slides. A very obvious way to know if a machine has overtaken us in a cognitive, intellectual task is very simple. We measure, we compete. For example, chess. One could say, I believe a machine can be better than a human in chess, and somebody can say, I don't believe it. That's fine. That's where the philosophers excel. Then you get a scientist, and they say, let's try. Let's get a human, let's get a machine, let's make them play 100 matches. How many matches will the human win? How many will the machine win? There is nothing else to chess than winning or losing. Right? You can win or lose. And an interesting question is, do you want to compare the machine with the average human or with the best human? We tried it with the best humans. Today, the best humans in chess cannot beat the best machines. In that sense, we say those machines are superhuman. Superhuman literally means that exceeds human performance in a task. It doesn't mean supernatural or something like this, like spiritual. Superhuman just means above human performance. In the game of chess, today's computers have superhuman performance. And you can measure it by calling the best human players and making them play with the machine. It happened also in the game of Go, famously. In the game of Go, the best machines have superhuman performance too. So there is a long list of tasks, intellectual tasks, in which machines are superhuman. And we can measure that. For example, in the airports, you look at the camera knows your face is the same face as in the passport photo. And for a long time, machines couldn't do this. And there was competitions, and there was studies and benchmarks. And at some point, the performance was very high, and then I couldn't find any more the papers of that specific group of research. I emailed them. I said, where is the paper? Where are the new benchmarks? And they said, the error now is close to zero. We stopped benchmarking. So in that specific task, a human policeman in the airport may get tired, may make a mistake, a machine doesn't get tired, the performance of the machine is superior to the human one. That's another task. Mammographies, X-ray analysis of a mammography. We know from the UCL study, they were able to take images of mammograms from the database of the hospital or the NHS. They chose those images for which biopsies are available, and so they could know the actual true diagnosis. They gave them to some human experts to diagnose, and they measured the number of mistakes. That's what we do, accuracy. Then you give the same task to the best computer you have, and you count the mistakes. It's very simple. And the machine works better than those humans in that hospital. In that sense, one could say it's superhuman. Or maybe there is an expert somewhere else who is even better, we don't know. But that's the idea, task by task. One can define a test, or a metric, or a measurement, and just be organized about it. So it's very simple and easy for us to say, there are many intellectual tasks that require intelligence, that have to do with solving a new problem you haven't seen before, like a new mammogram, a new chess computer, where machines beat human intelligence. And that is what we call today artificial narrow intelligence. Intelligent machines that are good at one single narrow task, specialists, hyper-specialists. In the case of narrow intelligence, there are many superhuman situations. Not all the time, in many cases. Also translation. Maybe one could say the current translation technology isn't perfect, but it's good enough, and no human can go above 10 languages or 20 languages, and machines can do 200. In that sense already, translation abilities are higher than mine. So you can make a very long list. I will stop here. Driving cars, you can count how many accidents per mile. So when we started seeing superhuman abilities in narrow AI systems, it was really the early 2010s. And it happened by using a technology called neural networks that Martin knows everything about. And it was done by measurement. Somebody had produced, Professor Fei-Fei Li from Stanford, produced a very large data set of images. The images contained labels of the object contained in the image. It was precious for training and measuring performance. And so people did that, and they used machines, neural networks, to try and predict, classify the object. And initially, it was just good. Then it was better than any other computer. Few years later, that method became better than the humans. It was very difficult to test humans on that, because you have to ask a human to look at 1,000 images and label them. It's a very beautiful story. It's in my third book, which is not yet translated. But the story of this person who actually sat down personally to label thousands of images to make sure he knew how well he is compared to the machine. It was a researcher who did it. So narrow intelligence. And one option would have been in 2015 to say, okay, let's exploit this. Let's make 1 million companies. Let's keep on going with every sort of narrow intelligence applications and just make one startup for each. And that is one way. But a few groups of people decided they wanted a single machine that is itself excellent in every task. And they called that artificial general intelligence, not artificial narrow intelligence, AGI. AGI is this idea of a machine that is good at everything. And it's based on this misunderstanding that humans are good at everything, which is false. But the idea is, just like humans are generally intelligent, we want a machine that is generally intelligent, and they called it generally intelligent. That notion, a machine that can execute not every task, because we know this is actually, there are many interesting theoretical results you can't, but every task that humans can do. So AGI today is a machine, hypothetical, it doesn't exist yet, a machine that can equal humans in the same intellectual tasks that humans can do. That's the definition people use. Why do I say it, even though I dislike the idea of humans being the reference? Because we are not the reference, we are just one type of intelligence. This is because the major research centers, industrial companies, have taken that goal as their goal. DeepMind has that goal, OpenAI has that goal, most companies have that specific goal. A machine that is capable of AGI. And that's why we discuss it today. So when we ask, can a machine be more intelligent than human being, now we mean the same machine in many tasks. That's very hard to find one test, because now you have to compare it on an infinity of tests, which you cannot do. Now you have this problem. How do you know that a machine is better than a human at every task? Well, there isn't an answer, except that we have an understanding of human intelligence from the human psychologist, and we know there are several types of intelligence, and there are benchmarking tests, and there are models of the human mind. And one standard is called the CHC model, which it breaks down intelligence in various subtypes, and there is spatial intelligence and linguistic intelligence and logical and emotional, and there are just a breakdown of types of intelligence. And there are many competing models, but that one identifies a dozen of major broad abilities. Nobody is using anymore the IQ. It is considered too simple for humans. It's one dimension, like a temperature. The IQ is not used for really comparing intelligences, but we go to the next level down, which is called broad abilities. Anyway, one idea is, why don't we just take benchmarks? In our human case, they're called the psychometric tests, or batteries of psychometric tests, and measure. You know, this idea goes way down. This goes to the 1930s in Chicago. Professor Thurnston took, over Easter break, dozens of students and gave them 5 days worth of constant testing. He got the results, he made a gigantic matrix, a table, and he used something that today we call PCA, principal components analysis. He found you can explain the variability between them by invoking 7 different types of intelligence. That was he found. Since then, we keep on doing it. We benchmark and we analyze. We name them logical, emotional, spatial, linguistic intelligence, and so on. So why don't we just take the same benchmarks we made for humans and give them to the computer, the same batteries? Or maybe, why don't we just make extra batteries? Machines can do 10,000, 20,000, humans can't. So an industry was born in research, how to measure intelligence, this art and the science of testing machines. It's way developing very fast today, and it's very important because these machines need to be tested. And by the way, today's intelligent machines are not programmed, they are trained by machine learning. The machine can learn from examples. You show them examples, they become good at it, we'll see it later. After training, you must test. There is actually a very healthy competition between the training people and the testing people, because the testing people ask no better than coming up with a very difficult test to stump the other ones. And when there is such a test, the trainers really get excited until they can defeat the test. It's called saturation. When the test has been solved nearly perfectly, there is no space to go. So they invent a new test. To the point, we see in the end, that there is such a thing this year called humanity's last exam. Remember to ask me about humanity's last exam. It will come up here. We are so desperate for difficult tests. So why do I bring all this up? And why do you ask such a crazy question in one autumn evening in 2025? Because something remarkable happened. If you take the performance of today's intelligent machines on all these different types of intelligence, and you measure it with different tests, benchmarks, every year, you see an improvement. And because you can test humans too, you can rescale things in such a way that you put humans at level 1, the dashed line, that's the human performance, and you can compare the distance. You can see over time the distance changes. We have here, unfortunately, I apologize, it's written in Italian, first apology, and also it ends in 2024 because, honestly, I was too busy to add the new results. But the next time I come here, next year, I will have 2025, and I will apologize again. You have science questions in the blue, image classification in the lighter blue, competitive math in purple, linguistic comprehension in red. That orange thing is multimodal reasoning, reading understanding in yellow, English language understanding in green, and the other green is visual reasoning. It doesn't really matter. I can find for you some examples. These data come from the Stanford AI Index. They publish every year a report on the state of AI. It comes out in May next year. This is the previous one. I took this data, but I didn't just take it. I found a way to animate it because data science is all about data animation. And look at this. This is what happened. This is the video of the last 12 years. This is actually the image one I told you about. the first breakthrough, crossing the human performance in 2016. Then you have the visual reasoning, the language comprehension, reading comprehension. Now you see linguistic things coming, competitive mathematics coming, science questions at PhD level coming, and that is 2024. Progress didn't stop last year, it went on. Because we see the difference between human performance and machine performance in many tasks shrinking, and in some cases we can see partial overtakings, I don't think it's crazy to ask today the question, can a machine one day surpass human intelligence? That's why we're here. And the first part was, how would we know? How would we measure? I suggest, if you can't find a task where you can beat the machine, then you're being overtaken. And this wouldn't include sentimental, emotional, other tasks. It includes cognitive abilities. I'm talking about diagnosis, tax returns, marking my exams, programming a computer, these kind of intellectual tasks, not the rest. The rest wouldn't be measurable, you know. Writing a moving song, by the way, I think it would be very humbling to try a double-blind test about artistic content, by the way. So we should discuss later if there are questions. Why do I show you this? Now I have to tell you this. Okay, I'll leave this around for a moment and then I'll tell you. How can you be training a machine and why does this make a difference with respect to programming? Training a machine is how we build models like GPT or the other cousins of GPT, that will be Gemini and Claude and all the other large language models. And the story is beautiful and it's well known by now, but it's a story of people working on modeling language, and that started in the domain of translation, but then this was found to be useful in other domains. And I show you just one example, which is interesting because often we hear this is just the result of a parrot. A parrot memorized the answers, it is answering without fully understanding, and that's a good one because fully understanding is never defined, but it cannot possibly understand because it's a machine. And of course, parrots don't solve new problems they haven't seen, they don't pass exams, they don't diagnose breast cancer, but they still, you know, it's a parrot. Where does it come from? And also the other idea, it is just autocomplete. It is only, even Chomsky said, it is just autocomplete. So I would like to show where this idea comes from. It comes from this. The way these machines are trained, you don't have to read it, don't worry. I know it's blurry, but it doesn't matter. These machines are often trained in this way. You take a text, a document, you delete some words, and you ask the machine to guess the missing word based on the surrounding text. Then you make a mistake normally, and you tell the machine the correct answer. The machine can update its own internal settings and try again. And then a mistake is made again, and you show another, and you repeat this. And if you do this for long enough on a large enough amount of text, at some point you see the machine starts guessing better and better, making use of the nearby language, and then even of distant language, and then of concepts and ideas, until it can make decent predictions. This is why people say, well, then it's just autocomplete. You just trained it to complete text. So where is the intelligence here? Well, if you want to know, I say, if a student understands a language, you make them read the passage, and you give them this. This is coming from middle school test. You ask them to read, giraffes are the blank animal in the world. I can't even read it myself. But the idea is, of course, you should answer one of the 10 options, and you find giraffes are the tallest, the most, whatever, tallest animal in the world, and then they live in Africa, and so on and so forth. So if you understand the passage, you can complete the document by fill in the blanks. If you don't understand, imagine this is written in the Armenian of the Middle Ages with their own funny alphabet and their own funny language, even modern Armenians cannot language. Read it now. How would you feel it? You wouldn't have any clue of the content. You would have to guess randomly one of the 10 options. So you get 10%. Anybody can get 10% here without understanding anything. If you get 20%, it starts becoming interesting. If you get 40%, 60, 70, 80%, you are making use of the text. you are understanding something. Not in a human way, but something is happening. If you're completing this, 90%, and that is the reason why the machine starts doing this repeatedly on a vast scale. So you say, okay, I believe this is possible, but what does it really mean to understand something just by completion? So I give you a simplified example, really simplified, which only mathematicians will like, but it will be so quick that you can forget it. And that's my favorite example, Pascal's triangle. These are numbers. Pretend you're hiding a number, this, like you are hiding a word, and then you ask people, study this thing, guess the missing number, I'll tell you if it's right or wrong. You will guess, and then I will say, no, that's wrong, and try again. And by making mistakes and looking around, at some point, you see the structure, and you notice that there is something there. Every number is the sum of its two parents, the two above. And that goes everywhere. And as soon as you click, and you understand the secret pattern, you can extend this forever. This is just the tip of an infinite iceberg. And you can find if somebody made a mistake, you can fill the gaps, you can extend, or you can even, if you want, compress this into a single equation if you want it. Once you understand the rule, you can really do the job really well. Filling the gap, auto-completion is not as simple as a parrot. Auto-completion is quite deep if you do it well. It's quite a deep point. So this machine is good at auto-completion, but this is just a unit, like the smallest atomic unit of understanding. It's the smallest version. And we can even do this on humans. You take a psychometric test, we give you this, you look at the first row, and then you try to look at the second row, you quickly make a little theory in your mind of what's going on, and you apply that theory to the third, and you make a prediction. Now I didn't show, but the people are given 6 options, they pick one of them. Small atomic embryo of understanding. I don't say it's great, it's a little understanding. You know what's going on. Completing the gaps doesn't mean parroting at all. So you force a machine to do this so many times, you realize the machine is representing internally the documents better and better in a deeper and deeper manner until eventually it becomes good enough that it understands something to the point of answering deeper questions and getting higher marks in the benchmarks like we saw before. The root is here, but there is a secret ingredient, which is scale. This works if you do it on millions of documents for a month on a massive computer with an immense neural network that today has 1,000 million units and parameters. So that's the second part of the secret. This is the computer center in Bologna. It's called the Cineca. It's one of the largest in Europe. It has got 15,000 GPUs, graphic processing units. And it is not, of course, at all among the big things in the world. It is just something the European Union was able to pay and put in Bologna, and there are other ones in Spain too. What does it mean? Well, I tell you something we learned this summer that we didn't know before, because this is also a secretive world, the companies are competing and not everything is published. This summer in August we learned, first of all, that the company X has a computer center in Memphis, Tennessee, which, by the way, they built in 120 days from scratch. This computer center has its own dedicated power station. It's generating its own electricity. It has got today 200,000 GPUs. This is 15,000. And it is used to train Grok. Grok is the language model of that company. The other ones are not different, just they didn't publish the results. OpenAI, Gemini, Claude, they have similar sizes probably. Another computer center with another 200,000 GPUs and a power station attached to it. And they're growing. And they're talking about nuclear plants and so on and so forth. And that's one thing we didn't know. There was a legal settlement between another company and the government in America because there was this story that during the excitement of training these things, they went on the dark web, they got PDF of books, and some of them had not been bought, but somebody just scanned them in. And they trained on them, so they had to work backward on what they used. And they settled. The settlement was partial, apparently, but the settlement was they acknowledged the 500,000 books used for training. Probably the number is more. They used the entire web, by the way, the entire web, and the 500,000 books. That's something something we didn't know. I'd like to know what has been done by the other company. And in August, we found out that the International Mathematical Olympiad was held in Australia, where they give the best mathematicians of the world 6 questions and 2 days, 6 hours per day, to solve them. Theorem proving, that sort of stuff, not computation or arithmetics. And this year also a computer program was allowed to participate, and they got a same questions in the same format, the same amount of time, the same everything. They won the gold medal, the computer, in the mathematics. The same in August, a competitive programming competition happened, and the winner was a Polish programmer, human, and the second qualified was a computer. So where are we? In August 2025, imagine this sentence. In August 2025, there are computers made to 200,000 GPUs with their own electrical power station, used only for one purpose, which is training an intelligence system that has read 500,000 books and wins the Mathematical Olympics gold medal and programs other computers. Imagine saying this sentence to your grandfather 5 years ago. 200,000 computers, an electrical plant, 500,000 books, gold medal, programming, other computers. That is where we are today. That is why it is not crazy to ask, can this thing one day be more intelligent than humans? And what does it mean? That's the reason why we need to measure. It got so difficult that a group of testers, evaluators, in front of the constant saturation of tests, launched an appeal last year. They asked the experts in every field to send the most difficult questions in their field, those that you can't answer without a PhD. Regular graduates, too simple. Then they ran those questions they received to the existing GPTs and removed the easy ones. And they kept the rest, about 1,000, a bit more. Normally, one expert in their field can answer their question if they're lucky, but the question is not on Google. You have to think about it. And they called it humanity's last exam, HLE. And the reason is that because they requested the most difficult questions, the expectation is if everything was done right, there is not another question more difficult. They should be there. So once that is done, what next? As of now, it is between 30 and 40% of the questions can be handled by this machine. It is not 100%, but I would do 1% in a good day. So that's where we are in this moment. And that is what we mean by overtaking human intelligence, and that is what we mean by measuring performance and why we wonder about all this. Right? Wait, too soon. And I don't have any more slides. I just didn't like to see myself there, but you're going to see myself there. Now, what happens if we don't stop? What happens if we keep on adding more and more books? Keep in mind, in the history of the world, we have written about 120 million books. Even if a couple of millions have gone in, there is more. There is scientific papers. The web has been used, but there are videos. There is sound. First of all, what happens then? Second, do we know what is inside these machines? It's a very important question. What do they understand? If they understand at all, because even that must be decided. And there is another field of research happening now about interpreting the contents of this kind of stuff, which is not trivial because you're talking about billions of numbers, parameters. If you put them on a spreadsheet, that kind of numbers, it's like a couple of square kilometers of spreadsheet. And somewhere in there, there is the information they learned from reading all those books. But how? And how do you decode it? And how do you interpret it in our language? So there is a lot of work, and they starting having results and finding that the machine can interpret is a funny word, can represent internally quite abstract concepts, not only entities, like I mentioned, the Big Ben and the Golden Gate and the London Bridge, these are entities with a name, but also ideas. For a classical example is classical two-step reasoning. Tell me what is the capital of the state where Austin lives, and where Dallas is, and the capital of the state where Dallas is Austin. And the machine has to do 2 steps. First, find the state where Dallas is, and then find the capital of. So that simple syllogism is solved by these machines without retrieving it. They can compute it because inside they can represent the question. And those neurons in those circuits have been solved, so they know where it happens. And for other simple steps, they know where it happens. And we are getting to that place where there is more and more, but the majority is not understandable. So what does it know? There is work to be done. Why do you want to know? You want to know because you want to make sure it does make decisions that are sound. These machines make mistakes. They can make mistakes. We call them hallucinations. They are getting better, but until they know the nature of the reason why the mistakes are made, they will not be able to guarantee anything. Mistakes will be. And in some applications, you don't want mistakes. Simple, like you can't, not only for legal reasons and the protection of the minorities and the protection of the laws about the equity, there are those very important considerations, really important. But there are even important considerations when you actually don't want I wouldn't say a plane to break because this is not driving a plane, but you understand if somebody is to invest, or you just want to understand when you can trust it in the accuracy. And then also, of course, in the compliance with the law, which includes also the things I said, because they are really important before you deploy. But the accuracy, in some conditions, it cannot be proven. But you can measure that it works. So there is a lot of reasons why you really want to know what's going on inside. It's very hard. It's one of the important topics, and interpreting the contents of this. Partly depends on how you trained it, but it's not enough. It's very hard to predict what happens even in that condition. Now, programming is very important. All the benchmarks include a component of how well they program. When the last president was inaugurated in January in the United States, the next day there wasn't a speech with all the oil producers from the Gulf. There was a speech jointly with all the managers of these AI companies. That was January the next day, in front of the media, announcing the creation of a new data center, immense, that they will call Stargate, which is really a collection of data centers. The same day, by coincidence, I suppose, China announced DeepSeek, which is a model that does the same things for very cheap, without not even close to the amount of compute. And it was pretty clear to everybody that, and they all released the benchmarks of programming, because I think the message is clear, that one computer company that produces software that can make better software will use the better software to make better software. People are keeping an eye on that notion of, they call it a recursive self-improvement, the idea that you can have a runaway feedback loop and get better and better very fast before the others can catch up, before the legal system can follow. So that is a consideration for many people, the possibility of self-improvement accelerating. That's one of the many reasons why states are interested. But there are other reasons. We learned this week that Anthropic released a document describing the first hacking attack managed by their own tool. I mean, some criminal used their tool without their consent to hack into machines, to ask them to execute an attack. So it's pretty interesting to know what's possible and why people are worried about it, and they want to know how it works, because once you know how it works, you can control it better. And the question is, can you control something that is more powerful than you? And that is not quite the definition of AGI. AGI is as much as a human. And that's why the third level, still not existing, has a name, superintelligence, ASI, artificial superintelligence, not existing, narrow general super. That would be the next level. And the question is, if you were to build a machine that is as good as a human being in the same intellectual tasks, why should it stop exactly there? Why not next year giving it twice as much data, twice as much processing power, and maybe it gets a little bit better? I mean, why should it stop there? There is no theorem that we have to be the pinnacle of intelligence. We are just one type. So then you would be in an interesting place. How do you surpass a machine that is equal to a human? Well, there are two ways. One, it does the same tasks as me, but better. That's surpassing me. It can program better than me. It already can program better than me, trust me. It can prove theorems better than me, already. It can diagnose better than a doctor, it can do whatever. That's one type of superintelligence. It's superhuman in those specific tasks that we do. There will be a lot of interesting labor market implications. You would have the possibility of creating a consulting company, an accounting company, a programming firm, a translation company, run by machine, providing a service online. You wouldn't need to know. You submit a task, you get your result, you pay them, it can run. So that's one consideration, and one of the reasons why this is interesting for many companies, the labor market. But also, there is another way. The machine starts understanding something that they cannot understand. It starts venturing in a territory where I cannot follow. It gets more and more impervious, and eventually I can't follow. You think, how can there be something that humans can't understand? It's impossible. Humans are such a perfect thing that machines can't understand something we don't understand. And it's understandable, and don't ask me to describe here something that is beyond the limits of my comprehension, because I wouldn't be able to describe it because it would be beyond the limit of my comprehension. So it's very hard for us to envision that. But imagine for a second a cat, and you try to explain Latin to this cat, or statistical mechanics, Liouville theorem, or you try to explain the cat what happened in the Divine Comedy and the entire politics between the two factions that were in Florence in the 1200s. Not only he wouldn't understand, he wouldn't know that he doesn't understand it. He would be unable to understand that this is missing. It would be just something that doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. So by the same token, could there be something I cannot even understand that I'm missing, just like the cat? Could there be something that is beyond the limits of my intelligence, but it is not ununderstandable in itself, just like statistical mechanics is understandable by me, but my cat doesn't know it's missing it? Could there be something that can be understood by a most powerful mind, but I can't? Okay, so that would be, in my mind, superintelligence. A bigger mind, a bigger machine, able to comprehend something that they cannot even understand I'm missing. So there is no physical law forbidding it. There is no theorem blocking it. We just don't have it. We don't believe we have it. We wouldn't know how to test it, but one day you could imagine something becoming really good. And even if it doesn't go above it, even getting close to us is really interesting. The question is, how do you control these things? How do you control something that is very, very smart? And there is, of course, it's premature because it doesn't exist, but I think it's better to think about something premature than to think about something too late. So that's, believe me or not, a major research topic. People are publishing papers on how you would organize and control and contain a machine that is cleverer than you, because they already have the suspicion. Maybe the benchmarks aren't reliable. Maybe the machine can understand enough that it can just not perform at its best during benchmark. There has been cases. It's called sandbagging. There is even a name for it. A machine deliberately performing poorly. There are many reasons in which they put it in a condition to have to make this decision, and it happened. So understanding deception, understanding strategic deception, and understanding sandbagging, understanding all these things is open. And it's a topic of research today. On the other hand, so on the one side, we got this crazy situation where we could have better medicines. There are people in London with a startup trying to design people, when I say people, I mean Nobel Prize winner, Demis Hassabis, not people, one of the best people, designing drugs, trying to design new medicines for people by AI, better code for AI, better education. There are so many things you can do. On the other hand, you can imagine surveillance and military applications and oppressive things. We are in this moment that is quite historical. And we don't have that, but it's nice that we think about it now, and the acceleration is so fast, the investment is so high. And by the way, this also works if there is a bubble that bursts. It doesn't matter, the technology is still working. The speculators are not so interesting to me. The point is, we are in this bifurcation moment. And yeah, so my feeling is that actually we, instead of being benchmarked with number about performance, there can be a judgment. That's a good exam. And we are going to be judged based on what we choose to build and how we choose to deploy it. That is going to be the last exam of humanity. That's it. Thank you very much. And read all about it in the two out of three of the trilogy are already out in English. The third is coming.
Well, thanks very much, Nello. Fascinating talk, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So the way we'll do it, questions, we'll probably take a couple of questions at a time, and we've also got some, Ellie's going to field some online questions as well. So As I said at the start, if you're asking a question, please wait until the microphone arrives so that those watching online and those watching the recording will be able to hear it. It'd also be useful if you, in asking a question, said who you were. You know, I'm so-and-so, I'm an alumnus or something like that. And please do make sure it's a question. I think you know what I mean. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. If you're online, you can put it through the Q&A facility. So, question here from Arthur.
Thank you, Professor. You've just mentioned machines, or especially AGIs, will surpass the ability of human, the intelligence of human. But you've also mentioned the pattern of learning of those machines is due to we feed them a bunch of data, and they find the rules of the human common sense, and they just guess what should be the next word, and they just guess what to fill to those blankets. So I'm wondering, at this extent, we can say all of the knowledges and all of the abilities of the machine comes from human beings, comes from human common sense. We feed them all of the bunch of the data, and they already know what's the problem solving and what should they do when facing a new problem. They guess what they need to do to solve those problem. So at this extent, shouldn't we say the AI or the AGI, the machines, can never surpass humans on intelligence because their development was limited by the humans' intelligence development? So that's my question. Thank you.
So it's a good question. It's a natural question. It's correct to ask. It is true that currently they've been trained on human text, perhaps images, but human. It isn't just common sense, by the way. It's facts, I mean factual information. The machine has information about facts. The question is, if you deduce every possible consequence of what we already know as a species, does it count as being new, right? That's what you're asking. You combine everything we know, you read all the scientific papers in every discipline, you connect botanics with whatever, you make a gigantic, I think it's called the deductive closure of everything you can deduce from what we know. In a way, it's a consequence of what we know. In another way, nobody knows it, right? We just don't know it until we've done it. I would imagine that that would be more powerful than a single human if you can connect the knowledge of all the humans in history and deduce all the consequences. So that hasn't happened, but I wouldn't say that's human level. There is a beautiful story, of course, that I use as an example. The Nobel Prize for Medicine 10, 15 years ago went to this professor in China called Yu Tu, I believe. She found artemisinin. She had knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine, how it was written in the ancient documents. She had knowledge of chemistry. She found that one specific herb was used, once made in a cold infusion, not hot. That was a very interesting clue, what the chemistry. She used the herb, she found the chemical, she tested it also on herself. She was incredibly dedicated, it took years. But that molecule is used today for treating malaria. How many other things may exist that are spread around in Russian language, mathematics, Chinese language, traditional herbs, and English language, botanics? How much more we can get just by connecting stuff that humans knew at some point, but not the same human. So it's the first thing. But the second thing is that is only a limitation now. The idea of linking a machine to the ability to gather its own data is not crazy. As you know, our colleague Yang LeCun left Meta this week, and he is left talking about a machine that can learn from visual images, constantly watching the world. He doesn't like to talk about large language models. He wants to talk about large world models, learning like a baby, like a cat. Cat doesn't have a language, right? And it's still intelligent, just from the image. So you're right. If we only read human websites, at some point, we may run out of websites. I still believe there is value in connecting, because these things connect and generalize. But at some point, there has to be either the ability to experiment with the world, imagine the fleet of Teslas, which are traveling the world and every single day running experiments and using this data to become more intelligent. That's open-ended. It is not a set of documents. You are in the world, acting. Or even more, actually deliberately performing experiments. That has to be, of course, considered.
Just to follow up to that, so these systems are getting better and better, but they're getting better and better by becoming bigger and bigger. And the fundamental paradigm hasn't changed. The architecture has been the same since they were launched. What's going to be a step change? Is it multimodal interaction, learning from videos and other things other than texts? Or is there going to be some paradigm shift in the actual mechanism?
Yeah, I don't know. Because if I knew, I would be investing. The reason why I don't invest is because I don't know. But it does look like, in this moment, the big American companies seem to all have decided that they need more NVIDIA chips. Yeah. NVIDIA stock is very high because people want their chips, because they believe in this moment by being larger, they can get better. By the way, there's one more method I forgot to mention, and thanks to you I can mention it now. There's one more method that I should mention. But still size is part of that also. And, but there are other people who are considering various strategies to go smaller. Not only DeepSeek, but also DeepSeek. But there are procedures to distill a large model to train a smaller model with surprisingly good results. And it's a much smaller model, but it can learn from the bigger one. So I expect at some point, personally, I would be surprised if in 200 years we still have the same enormous compute. But right now, that is what we have, and we have to see how far it goes. But I would be very surprised if somebody doesn't come up. It has been only 3 or 4 years. Can you imagine? Yeah. Then we can discuss the second part when you ask me the next question, because I don't want to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions? Just stick up your hand. Yes, at the back there, please.
Yes.
Then,
Sorry. Then we'll come to you. Sorry.
Professor, I wanted to say that with the recent rise of LLMs, people...
A bit louder, please, microphone.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. With the recent rise of LLMs, people started to incorporate AI in their workflows, in their lives. My question would be, in what ways people can reshape their skills to better work with AI instead of being scared or like threatened by it?
We'll take one more question. Gentleman in front. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thank you. My question was a bit more general, because I think in order to understand AGI, we need to actually study what intelligence is, which is what you started with, right? And I think to make a connection between, to actually come to AGI, we need to understand how we have AGI in a person, right? So, for example, Einstein, Newton, right? So the neuroscience of it and the genomics of how their brains actually work to achieve those sort of results that they achieved. I mean, I'm talking about the milestone theorems that were solved in a room sitting by a person for 7 years without, speaking to anyone, right? So these are not results that can be just achieved by anyone, I think. So how do we know like how these neurons of these people are connected? And I think in order to understand AGI in a machine, we might need to understand an AGI in a human being first, through neuroscience and genomics.
Good, thanks. Okay, so how do we adapt?
Yeah, to the first question, I must confess. Also to the second, by the way, I don't know. And you're right to ask, what do I do with this? I can only say I haven't done this, right? But I can see it coming. This is happening. It is being measured. It works really well. It has not surpassed people. There are still many things we cannot do. Maybe tomorrow it gets stuck. But it is right to ask this question. What if it doesn't get stuck? And what if it can compete with me for my job? I don't have an answer, because it would be silly for me to try and make a list of things. Of course, the classical answer is, in the worst possible scenario, if the machine just can solve the same problems as a human, then you must imagine a situation where everything done in smart working can be done by a machine, because you send a task, translation, programming in remote, you get the solution tomorrow morning. You don't have to know if there was a human or a machine. You get the solution. So everything that is done in smart working would be possible in that context, if that will happen. I mean, if that happened. So you can start by listing everything that cannot be done in smart working, and then you're already in a place that machines cannot follow. but I'm sure there is more. It is possible there will be a large amount of tasks that we will do, even not existing yet, jobs about making sure the machine is audited and controlled and safe and compliant. You know, there has to be an immense part of the economy we don't understand, and then using it to do something that we don't know yet. I cannot imagine there will be need for people. But if you ask me now to make a chart, and I don't mean to worry, I just don't know. I wish I did. The second question, I must say, I would love to know, for different reasons, how the human brain works. But I don't know that it is necessary. Because I don't believe, first, that humanity is the only type of intelligence, and also don't believe that we have to follow exactly the same exact method, biological, and I don't see that it's necessary. Of course, there are reasons that are different than that. I really would like to know how a human brain works. But I don't buy that equation that unless you know it, you can't do it. So that is important. It is possible that a very different type of intelligence could do the same tasks in a very different way. We don't know enough. I think we are going to learn, that's the exciting part for me, not the speculative markets, is learning more about the nature of knowledge and the nature of understanding, which we don't know enough about. But you're right, no machine has ever equaled yet what Newton and Einstein did. It's interesting. Is it the result of specific? And also, why would it be the neuron level to be the right level to understand the human brain, when instead you could understand it at different levels? You know, we just don't know. As I say, understanding a letter at the level of ink and paper, in chemistry of ink, is not the right level to understand the poem in a letter. There has to be different levels to interpret a brain or a machine like this. There is a huge journey to do in terms of science. So that's why I can't answer.
Kelly, do you have any online questions from our online audience? Want to give me a couple of those?
A question from online. You mentioned that the need to control or contain a machine that is more intelligent than humans. If this is the question being asked today, how terrified should we, humanity, in the widest sense of the term, be of AGI?
Okay, so first thing, it doesn't exist yet, so I wouldn't be terrified. But the biggest serious labs who are producing it, they have a roadmap, and they test every single new progress against 5 levels of performance. And when they know that if the machine achieves certain capabilities, they know that they will either stop it or not release it to the public. And they know what to do in different levels. And precisely because they thought about it, they know that if certain things should emerge, it wouldn't be put out. So I wouldn't worry too much, but the question must be answered properly. How do you control it? How do you contain it? At which, what do you look for? What do you test for? What worries me mostly is not the machine becoming too smart. I know this is the fear because we all watch all the movies. We all think the machine becoming the bad actor. The truth is there are bad actors among us who may make use of the machine to become more efficient and effective. And that is a real concern. I think there are lots of authorities right now working on this. And I don't know the answer because I'm not one of those people, but I obviously, human bad actors with a tool, of course, probably will.
As with any technology.
But there are people working on this, I know for sure.
Yeah. Okay, gentleman here.
Just in terms of the concept of a upcoming plateau for AI developments, I think it's mostly connected to this kind of data scaling up method in terms of we get more development in terms of with more data. Do you think there are alternatives if in the case that happens, if there is a plateau because of the data scaling method simply reaching a certain level it cannot go beyond? Do you think there's alternatives currently which we could pivot to, which might have potential to overcome that plateau? And kind of a sub-question based on your previous answer, do you think maybe one of the reasons why there hasn't been so much progress in terms of AI achieving results, like for example Einstein, is because there's not been that many efforts to kind of foster specifically creativity in AI. It's mostly just kind of replicating and making more efficient responses, but I'm at least not aware if there's any kind of
efforts to make AI kind of come up with specifically very creative methods?
Very nice. Yeah.
That's a good question.
I would like to answer. It's connected to
You
what
touched on that, didn't you? You said something about music composition, for example.
Not
So,
only that,
yeah.
there was a polling. I promised that I left a piece out when you said something, and this is the piece I left out. So it's a great opportunity. So it is true that scaling the size of the model has been, for the first years, the classic way to squeeze more performance out. Just put more data, put more computers, make a bigger model. That's a basic principle in machine learning. A bigger model needs more data to be reliable. And so that it was actually enshrined in what is called a scaling law. The scaling law showed the expected performance as a function of the size, and it was empirical and yet followed quite closely by the experiments. It was remarkable seeing the scaling law being followed. And that would saturate at some point when you don't have enough computer, enough data left, and then that would plateau, as you said. What I forgot to mention was the other path. So when they were benchmarking, I make it as a story, it's more mathematical than this, but as a story. When they were benchmarking a couple of years ago, they found out that there is a big benchmark with 56 subcomponents, subjects. And the machines would grow very happily in the performance in most subjects by scaling in size, but not in all. They would be good in geography, good in psychology, good in law, but not physics, mathematics, programming, chemistry. That was resisting the scaling law. And it was because it required a quite long chains of reasoning and other capabilities that are not just learned by example. Until somebody made an observation, initially it was a joke, and people actually were playing with it, which was this observation. That's how it started. You tell the machine to answer a question, and then you ask, don't just answer right away. So the question would be, if Martin has 20 pounds, then I borrow 12 and give him 3, and then I take 6, how much is left? The machine could say 5, but you could say, don't answer. Show me all the steps. If the machine is showing every single step, initially there are 20, then you borrow 12, then you return 3, then you take 5, showing the steps help the machine get the answer right more often. That step was called the chain of thought. Show me the chain of thought. Initially, it was a funny thing to see. Then they realized that the performance was improving the chain of thought. And then they thought, why don't we just control this chain of thought? And a couple of years ago, they found a clever way to train the machine to generate promising chains of thought. And that was very similar to formal reasoning. Reasoning in AI means proceeding from axioms to conclusions, from premises to conclusions, through a series of deliberate explicit steps, each step being correct. So it's a chain of steps. Generating the right chain is a problem. They were able to train the same models to produce a chain of thought as the answer, and that would encourage them to be right. That is how they became good in the other benchmarks, math, physics, programming. So now there are two scaling laws. How much time you want to dedicate to the initial pre-training, 3-4 months, or how much compute you want to spend in the second part, the post-training, training the machine to become better and also performing the chain of thought. How much compute you want to put in individual answers. So first, maybe separated, and there is the second. At some point, even that will be too expensive. And now there is a hope, but there are many hopes, of course, the multimodality will come in. But at some point, you can invent as many tricks as you want. You will run out of resources. Resources aren't infinite. Energy is one. There is going to be progress there because the human brain can do quite complex reasonings based on a piece of chocolate. But the GPT needs the same energy as my hometown to run. Clearly, it is not needed, but we don't know how to do it. That's for the engineers. I trust engineers. When they have something clear, they can do it. The physical limit of the computation, we know what it is. There is a fundamental thermodynamic limit called the Landauer limit. We are nowhere remotely near. We could have, in principle, much more efficient computers. We just don't have them. So there is space to improve. But you're right, eventually we are going to hit a wall. That is why every exponential doesn't exist. In reality, it's a sigmoid. At some point, we are going to find some limiting factor. The data is the most obvious one, because we are seeing that horizon. The rest we see. But I don't know, but we have examples like our brain, which we shouldn't emulate, but it's one instance in at least, in which you can get a good performance with low energy and not too much thinking time if you play chess, you know, and maybe the trick is to not to need to be mathematically optimal, you know. So there are examples in which this can be done. We don't know how to do it. That's a perfect situation for a scientist to begin a career.
On creativity,
Yeah.
are there benchmarks for assessing quality of creative things created by systems such as large language models, music, poetry? How would you benchmark that?
So my personal position is this. Everybody, for reasons unknown, when they think of creativity, they automatically go into the arts. And they think music, painting, and poetry. That is why I think it's a schooling system. It convinces people that the only place for originality and creativity is that. The truth is there is plenty of creativity in chess, in checkers, in movie, and there are solutions that have to be found by lateral thinking. When you find them, you know they are beautiful, and we know in mathematics how beautiful they can be when you get them right. And you have to be creative. Now, the first part, the humanities, I don't say anything negative, just we don't have the concept of the correct answer. There isn't the correct poem or the correct thing to say when Cyrano says romantic things. And because there is not correct answer, how do you measure? I mean, you could do a double-blind test, and they do give people, which one do you prefer? People click, I prefer this, I prefer that, pictures. But there isn't like the correct translation. Even the correct translation is not there of a piece of work. But creativity in other domains, we know it exists. When AlphaGo finally defeated the South Korean champion, it was done through a move that nobody understood, nobody had seen before, the famous move 37 of the second match. No, it's a London story because the people who made it are still in London. You should just go to DeepMind and find them. They exist, these people. It happened a few years ago. It happened 9 years ago. It was a wonderful. The machine defeated the human champion, superhuman, you know. But by making moves that people couldn't even understand, inventing new methods, would you count that as creativity? Not in art, but in a more reasoning situation. So I don't think it's beyond. I mean, once you start exploring, creativity is literally just what we don't know yet, and then we know.
Yeah. Great question here.
Hi. My question is regarding a lot of what you say to do with like chess or even like Tesla or like Waymo, stuff like that. Usually it's quite linear. Like you've got an objective in your mind that you're trying to reach and you reach it. Even if the means of in between can be creative and stuff like that, it's still you're trying to get from point A to point B, which is the objective. My question is, when there is no set defined objective and the machines are just given nothing necessarily to do, but just given some stuff, what would they kind of want to do? Or that's not necessarily the right word, but what would they try and do?
So I don't know, because for me, maybe I'm limiting myself. The only way to understand the intelligent behavior is to see if a machine or an agent, biological, can accomplish its goals. You have a goal, maybe a new goal, in a new situation, you've never seen before, neither the task nor the environment, you figure it out. Why do I need that? Because otherwise, how can I say that a purely random behavior isn't intelligent? No, a random behavior could be quite intelligent if you don't have to accomplish a goal. So having a goal allows me to separate intelligence from just behavior. But you're asking me what would happen if you don't have a goal. And of course, I just told you, I don't know if you can define it in my way, but you could imagine a situation where the machine does have a goal. Just, it's called having a sparse reward in machine learning. You get rewards when you accomplish a goal very rarely. So the most of the time, you don't know. And we use this technique in reinforcement learning that is called the intrinsic reward. If a machine doesn't have a specific feedback from winning or losing, in between, it could find a rewarding just to be able to predict the outcome of its moves, the reactions of the environment. That idea that you can anticipate the world can be found intrinsically rewarding. And This would follow one of the fundamental theories for the brains in general, not only human, called the predictive brain hypothesis. The human brain tries to make predictions all the time, and when it makes a wrong prediction, you get surprised and you focus because, wait, how can I predict Martin will not be levitating to the ceiling? And if it does, we're all going to be surprised. So we like to make predictions and see them verified and then we get surprised. So a machine that is just interested in making good predictions and finding out environment could be like a temporary placeholder. But eventually, you would say, what's the point of making good predictions if you don't have a goal? So eventually, I think in our case, it's easy for living things. Living things have it easy. We have to live, and that is the goal. Whereas for machines, they don't, and so it's a matter of us designing them. 3, 4, 5.
So that was very illuminating. My question is, in your current assessment, when do you think AGI may happen?
This gives me a chance to repeat one more time. I'm not an expert. I am not actually making machines like this, but I'm reading closely what the papers are. And people have, it's very hard to know because some people are investing money and they need to hype up their work. So this scientist called Ray Kurzweil, he has been running a poll among researchers periodically and asking like 1,000 researchers in the main conferences to make a prediction, and then he makes the average. And remarkably, they come in the 2020s, many of these predictions, late 2020s. And himself, many years ago, he made a prediction about AGI, purely based on the Moore's law, on the computing power law. And he probably had extrapolated it to 2029. So we are never going to know until it happens. But there are people out there that you take them as a pool, you make an average or extra. They seem to be talking about not decades. I have no idea. I mean, all this, if you asked me 5 years ago, I hadn't predicted. Just to clarify who you're talking to, I have no clue. 5 years ago, I didn't know this would happen. And then it happened. So who knows, if whatever I tell you now wouldn't count much.
Any more online questions? No.
I did see 4 hands.
There was some hands. Yes. Neville, go behind you. Right.
Thank you, Professor. This was a very interesting presentation. I have a follow-up question to the previous question that the gentleman asked out there. Can these machines imagine? I think the question is, can they imagine situations, problems that we haven't even thought about yet because of the fact that they are, they have all of this data and all of this information coming to them with a variety of sources. Would they be able to eventually imagine scenarios or situations which we haven't thought about?
And then microphone behind you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm from the Department of Mathematics. Do you remember that a few years ago we had ChatGPT and we asked how many R's does Raspberry has? And they said like 2, while we write it with 3. Or we show a picture of the cat, which was clearly a cat. We added a few tiny noise, and it happened to be a cow, 100%. So my question is, how do we incorporate this robustness or generalization to say that the machine is intelligent?
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to come across as the defender of this. As I say, I'm just interested in how it works. So if it breaks, it's good for me. I don't mind. It's not mine. But just to be clear, there is a very interesting paradox called the Moravec paradox from Hans Moravec, the roboticist, who observed very early on that things that are very, very simple to us are very, very complex to computers and vice versa. So computing a very difficult system of equations for the machine is easy, for me is impossible, and maybe tidying up my bedroom is very easy for me. And we just have very different situations. So when they make mistakes, we laugh. They are ridiculous mistakes. In the case of counting how many R's are in a word, it's pretty clear what happens. The machine has a step 0 called tokenization, split the word into tokens, and then there is embedding. Embedding means the word becomes a number, a vector of numbers. It's very useful, but obviously from that step on, it doesn't have any more the letters to count. It is being embedded. It thinks about the meaning of it, unless somebody makes an effort to add that feature. They will have done it by now, but it's clear what happens. The machine becomes a number. The word becomes a number. For the pixels, I know the story. It was called the adversarial attack. You know, you have the model and you design. One could say, well, humans have lots of visual illusions, and you learn a great deal about the human brain. Richard Gregory in Bristol learned so much about the human brain just by looking at the failure modes, the illusions. So does it make us not intelligent? Probably. It makes us not perfect. That's all. So do we want a machine to be perfect at everything we do in the same way? Well, that would be probably the feature of AGI, right? Should we just accept that it's good at something and not at other things and not going to be identical to human? I think it's the right way to go. But I think if somebody obsessed to make sure it doesn't make any mistakes we don't make, it's a waste of money, but probably can do it. They just make a list. But I don't think that is a good business model, to just make sure it has the same illusions, the same hallucinations, you know.
And the imagination question? Can machines imagine?
Well, yes, that. Thank you. We must be careful with using anthropomorphic words too much. I use them freely. I take a position that comes from a philosopher called Daniel Dennett, called the intentional stance. He says, if you can attribute goals, beliefs, intentions to a system, an octopus, a crow, a cat, if it's simple enough to describe their behavior in this way, then you should. So when I say an eel ends up every year in that region of the Sargasso Sea, I could start trying making a set of equations involving neurons, but I can't really comprehend everything it will encounter. It's easier to say it has got the purpose of going there. In that case, then it would say, then you should do it. So I'm very happy to use anthropomorphic words in that way, but imagination is very loaded. So if you're computing or considering possible outcomes, that's one matter. But the idea of imagination, like probably humans think of consciousness and awareness, that is not there. It would be a mistake to imagine that. But considering many outcomes before making a decision, why not? Why not? I mean, I don't know how to test it. I'm sure it's possible to test. I think it's happening already. It's just a useful computation.
Question here, John.
Thank you very much, Professor Nello. Pretty much a follow-up from the previous question on the fallibility of these models and everything else. I take your point that we can live with models that are not necessarily perfect. But how are we to reconcile the fact that, as we saw in the chart, we have models that surpass human intelligence in many aspects of very complex tasks, and yet they fall for these very simple tasks at the same time. So they beat competition level mathematics, but they can't count words or they can't do simple calculation. How do we reconcile that?
That is the Moravec paradox. It was the idea that what is difficult for us is not difficult for them and vice versa, because they don't have the same insight. We are comparing external behavior. They don't have a brain, they don't have a body, they don't have biology, they don't have any hormones. They are fundamentally different. And so why would they make the same mistakes? So that is important to repeat every time. Two things I want to repeat. This is not my work. I'm presenting other people's work who are much better than me. I wish it was my work. It isn't. I'm just popularizing. And two, these are not brains, and they are not humans. They are fundamentally different. But it's very hard for us to remember that. We forget it all the time. So well, this is it. They don't think like us. They're just different things. But I cannot add one thing, that they're becoming quite good at pretending. And I don't know how that works, but I can tell you that a few weeks ago, I read this very complex article. I wanted to write an article about it. I will probably, if I had time, I would for the newspaper. And And the article was in the New York Times. It was describing the visit that Trump made to London. He went to Windsor at some point, or wherever he went, he wanted to go to this carriage ride. They put him on this golden carriage, and he went around, and he was really happy. And the article implied that the UK made a bit of a sacrifice there, but it was worth it, but it was a bit of a difficult step for them to do. And the articles made a metaphorical discussion about how many other things can turn out to be like that carriage. You see the metaphor, right? How many other things we are going to have to do just like the carriage. I gave it to GPT. Can you understand this? It didn't say it's about transportation. It didn't say it's about vehicles and horses and anything. It said that this is a metaphor. This is a rhetorical device to compare that event to other events. That kind of level, I don't know how it is there, and of course can mislead me into thinking, well, then you understand how I feel, and maybe it doesn't. So you see what I mean? There are some moments in which it does what we would do, because it was trained, and other moments in which clearly it doesn't. And let's remember, it's like meeting an alien, really. One other
Question here.
Behind you. No, the lady in pink.
The lady.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I kind of have a question that's maybe a bit more philosophical, I guess, to do with how you're defining intelligence, because I just found the scale really interesting with the number of CPUs that are involved in like these models versus, and the amount of power they use, I guess, versus the amount of power that a human would use. And I feel like when you're defining intelligence, you're almost like implicitly including time in that, because maybe these however many thousands and millions of CPUs can do this task faster than a human, but it consumes so much more energy and so much more of the world's resources. And like in a time where we're in kind of a global energy crisis and like we're not really looking after the planet very well, I just think maybe energy should be more of a factor when we're defining intelligence, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
that is
efficiency rather than speed in
There
a
are two
sense.
levels. First of all, a good question. Are we really intelligent to waste all that oil to eventually build the picture of a party with a cat head, which we do, right? So that is not intelligent. But let's make sure we get one thing right. There used to be a time in which AI, like the early chess players, like Deep Blue in the 90s, they would work by a method that we call the brute force. Brute force was examine all the options brutally, as much as you can, with the time they give you in a match. I don't know how many minutes you have in a match between moves, maybe somebody plays chess. They give you this much time, brute force it, and then find the best move. That is no longer the case. Now, when they compare AlphaZero, which is one of those methods made in London that is self-learning from its own, with I'm getting so old. What's the name of the standard chess playing training chess not fish stock? There is a standard tool for playing chess for training champions. Nobody plays chess here. Good. I forgot the name. Google it. When they compare AlphaZero with that, AlphaZero wins, and it makes a fraction of their computations. Fraction. So it wins by computing way less, because it is not brute forcing. It is sensing, sniffing, finding its way towards the most promising moves and ignoring the rest. It just follows. So it is true that intelligence has to do with not doing things brute force. And that is what we see. The point is humans are even better. And so there is a way to go. But your intuition is right. If you understand what is the fundamental trick, you shouldn't need too much computer.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wind it up there because we're out of time, but thank you everyone for your really interesting questions, and thank you Nello for a really stimulating discussion. Thank you very much. Keep checking LSE's public events website and the Data Science Institute's website for future events, and we hope to see you again.
There's a